All I got now is strength. But I think maybe if I keep singing, maybe I'll get it. That's what I think.
She was electric, unpredictable, and utterly unforgettable. Janis Joplin didn't just sing the blues, she bled them on stage. But behind the gravel-soaked voice and whiskey-soaked smile was a chaos even her fans never saw coming. When news of her death at 27 hit the headlines, the world chalked it up to another rock tragedy. But the official autopsy? It whispered something far more unsettling. A lone hotel room, a final phone call, a missing mark that raised more questions than it answered. In this video, we're diving into the strange, shadowy details hidden in the pages of Joplin's autopsy report. Facts long buried beneath the myths. The real story doesn't match the legend, and it starts here. The scene of death. On the morning of October 4th, 1970, Janis Joplin was found dead in room 105 at the Landmark Motor Hotel in Hollywood, California. The discovery was made by her road manager, who had grown concerned when she failed to show up for a scheduled recording session. What he found was a scene that would haunt the music world. Joplin's body was lying on the floor beside her bed, face down, with no immediate signs of trauma. Her passing marked the abrupt end of one of rock's most powerful and emotionally raw voices. The room itself offered small but telling details. Scattered near her were everyday items: loose change, a new pack of cigarettes, and the key to her room. These suggested that she had returned just moments before from a brief trip to the hotel's front lobby vending machine. It was the kind of mundane errand that gave the tragedy a chilling ordinariness. She hadn't expected the night to end in death. Her purse and makeup were placed on the dresser, indicating no frantic behavior before her final moments. Even with the reported presence of paraphernalia at the scene later, there were no signs of a struggle, break-in, or physical injury. The bed had not been disturbed, and there were no signs of violence or panic in the room. These are some of the clues that led the coroner to believe that the overdose had probably happened quietly and alone, supporting the tragic notion that one of music's most fearless performers had passed away alone. What is so eerie about this specific environment is how it contrasts with Joplin's public image. On stage, she was chaotic and electric, a woman whose suffering appeared to erupt from her with each note. In death, she was quiet. The loneliness of that hotel room spoke a different sort of story, one of silence, maybe long endured behind the wails of her vocals and the blinding light of the spotlight. Room 105 would be an integral part of rock lore, more than simply where Janis Joplin died, but where the energy of a generation lost one of its most outspoken voices. But while the room told one story, the lab results told another, one that made her final dose far more disturbing than anyone first realized. Toxicology findings. The official autopsy report confirmed what many had suspected. Janis Joplin died of a... Though she was known for her fondness for Southern Comfort whiskey, toxicology tests revealed only alcohol and no barbiturates, stimulants, or other recreational were detected. The combination of the two substances, both central nervous system depressants, proved fatal. However, it wasn't just the presence of raised alarm, it was the potency of the that stood out as unusually lethal. Reports from that week in Los Angeles indicated that a particularly strong batch was circulating among local users. Investigators estimated the purity level of Joplin used to be between 40% and 50%, significantly higher than the street average at the time, which was typically cut down to less than 10%. This dangerously pure product caught many off guard, even seasoned users like Joplin. Within just days of her death, multiple other overdoses were reported in the same neighborhood, strongly suggesting that Joplin had not been the only victim of that batch. Within room 105, paraphernalia was found that consisted of a syringe, a spoon with residue, and other items typical of recent. These discoveries were consistent with the medical examiner's conclusion that her death was accidental. The absence of other, in light of Joplin's reputation for suggested she had perhaps only planned to take recreationally that evening, not lethally. There was no indication of taking her own life letter or previous intention to harm herself, supporting the conclusion that she had misjudged the strength of. After the fact, people wondered not only about Joplin's personal decisions, but also about who provided her with. Insiders and friends wondered whether a well-known dealer had sold her the batch without informing her of its strength. While no one was ever formally charged in relation to her death, the extremely potent week put a cloud over Los Angeles's nightlife and raised larger questions about responsibility in backstreet distribution channels. In Joplin's case, one dose of the wrong product was irreversible, highlighting the lethal randomness of even among the most sophisticated abusers. Needlemark controversy. In the immediate aftermath of Janis Joplin's death, early reports from responders described a puzzling detail. There were no immediately visible needle marks on her body. For someone widely assumed to be a regular, this absence struck some as suspicious. It fueled early speculation that either she hadn't been a habitual injector or that someone had attempted to obscure the circumstances of her death. The lack of visible injection sites clashed with the official conclusion of prompting questions about whether the scene had been altered before authorities arrived. Adding to the mystery were reports from within her entourage that a friend might have entered the room prior to emergency personnel being called. It was reported in some accounts that this individual would have removed or rearranged equipment, perhaps in hopes of keeping Joplin's image intact or to protect themselves from prosecution. While charges were never filed and the tales never formally corroborated, they did remain a part of music history and introduced a twist to already sad circumstances. That she perhaps may have cleaned up her death or hid its occurrence further raised the public interest about what truly occurred in room 105. When the coroner's report was completed, it documented faint needle punctures, slight and not immediately apparent to emergency responders. These punctures, though, did not match up with the heavy scarring usually found on long-term intravenous users. This discrepancy created one more enigma. If Joplin had been shooting heroin regularly, why were signs of injection so slight? One explanation was that she had very briefly started to use at the time of her death, following a short abstinence, and this could account for her decreased tolerance level and the absence of physical indicators of regular usage. The absence of clear answers still generates rumors decades on. Although the autopsy verified overdose as the cause of death, the circumstances regarding how, when, and by whom the heroin was injected, and whether anyone acted in response afterward, remain unclear. In a life as sensational and unedited as Janis Joplin's, the faint inconsistencies of her death allow room for skepticism, hypothesis, and myth. In the end, the controversy surrounding the needle mark echoes not only the enigma of her death, but the intricacy of her stormy and underappreciated life. In addition, the medical reports questioned the purity and potency Joplin used, which was said to be significantly stronger than what was normally available at the time. A number of overdoses were reported in the same neighborhood that weekend, indicating that perhaps a highly potent batch had been in circulation. This created a further level of complication to her death, not only how it was delivered, but what she exactly took that would have overpowered her system. The fact that even a limited amount could slay someone with a lowered tolerance narrowed the tragedy down, highlighting that one moment back on use under the wrong circumstances could be lethal. The party provision. Just 2 days before her untimely death, Janis Joplin made a striking revision to her will. In what many have since interpreted as a hauntingly prescient move, she allocated $2,500 for a posthumous party in her honor. This wasn't a formal memorial or somber ceremony. It was a celebration she planned for her friends to enjoy after she was gone. The clause instructed that the money be used for an all-night gathering, where her close circle could get blasted in her name. Coming from a woman known for living loudly and without apology, the request was oddly in character, yet deeply unsettling in its timing. The party was hosted, as asked, at the Lion's Share, a San Anselmo, California bar that had become one of Joplin's hangouts. Around 200 of her friends, collaborators, and fellow musicians convened there to party, dance, and hear music. The celebration, paid for completely by the sum she had set aside, was full of laughter, tales, and tears, obscuring the line between tribute and a last act of defiance. There was no traditional funeral. For Joplin, the hard-living, emotionally bare performer, this was the only farewell that could work. To some, the party provision is a sick joke from a person who had dabbled with death for years. But to others, it is a profoundly intimate declaration of how she wanted to be remembered, not as a tragic figure, but as a unifying force through music and spirit. The fact that she made the change so close to her death has led to speculation that she may have sensed the end was near. Whether it was intuition or coincidence, the inclusion of such a specific clause so shortly before her passing suggests a reflective awareness of her own fragility. Nowadays, the clause is frequently quoted in biographies and retrospectives as one of the most revealing windows into Joplin's mind. It is a reflection of her humor, her affection for contact, and her disdain for conventional norms, even in death. The wake she arranged herself has become part of rock legend, not just for what it says, but for its chilling foresight. In a world that tended to reduce her to caricature of chaos, the party directive in her will was a statement of a woman who had no uncertainty about how she wished to be remembered. Not in sorrow, but with music, with madness, and one final toast. Eyewitness testimonies. In the hours following Janis Joplin's death, those closest to her began to piece together her final timeline, and quickly ran into contradictions. Her bandmates and producer had been expecting her at the recording studio on the morning of October 4th, where she was scheduled to lay down vocals for the track Buried Alive in the Blues. When she failed to show up without any notice, alarm bells rang immediately. It was completely out of character for Joplin, who, despite her reputation for chaos, took her music seriously. Her absence led her road manager to check the landmark motor hotel, where he made the grim discovery. The final days of her life were filled with meetings that left different impressions of her frame of mind. Some friends said she had appeared lively and cheerful, thrilled about her continual recording sessions for her solo album, Pearl. She had apparently discussed upcoming projects and seemed to be relishing her recent success. Others remembered a very different Janis, secluded, isolated, and maybe emotionally spent. These two competing versions have been the source of speculation for decades on whether she was emotionally vulnerable or merely caught off guard by a highly toxic dose of. The last known individual to speak to Joplin was her road manager, John Cook, who received a call from her late in the evening of October 3rd. In his version, she sounded fine. Nothing in her tone or words indicated distress or out-of-the-ordinary behavior. She was quoted as saying that she would go out for cigarettes and then come back to her room. That discussion, in its seeming normalcy, is now a cold last detail. She might not have realized that she was only hours from an overdose that would slay her, that there is no frantic behavior, no missed calls, and no visible evidence of distress about her death makes her death all the more abrupt and unreal. These different accounts and timeline discrepancies continue to leave one wondering what exactly occurred in Joplin's last hours. Was she just a casualty of a fatal drug batch at the wrong moment? Or was something more going on beneath the surface, emotionally or otherwise? The inconsistencies of eyewitness accounts prove the difficulty in comprehending a person like Joplin, whose life was forever teetering between seconds of joy and crushing despair. Ultimately, her passing left not only a void in the studio, but a lasting enigma to those who knew her best. But while those closest to her offered conflicting memories, it was Janis herself, on national television, who may have revealed the clearest signs of what she was truly battling. Candid final interviews. Janis Joplin's final public interviews offer a haunting glimpse into the internal conflict she faced behind the scenes of her turbulent stardom. In particular, her last appearance on The Dick Cavett Show has become a poignant moment in music history. Although she appeared vibrant, funny, and quick-witted, trading playful jabs with Cavett and charming the studio audience, there was a visible undercurrent of weariness in her demeanor. When Cavett, a friend and frequent interviewer, gently teased her about her image and reputation, Joplin responded with smiles, but also with flashes of vulnerability. She spoke candidly about the loneliness that accompanied fame and how, despite being constantly surrounded by fans and musicians, she often felt emotionally isolated. Most notable in her remarks was the frustration she felt with how she was viewed. Joplin had established a career on raw, unadulterated emotion, but she came to feel that people cared more about her image than about her playing. She felt trapped by the photo of the loose, hard-drinking, uncontrollable rock star, a persona in which, partly, she cooperated, but one that would come to overtake her music. In speaking with her for my interviews, she complained about being criticized and how critics favored to overlook her singing ability and lyrical writing depth in place of discussing how she lived her life and theatrics on stage. It was something she encountered all too frequently, a want to be perceived, not simply observed. Joplin longed for recognition of her work, not merely an exhibition of her suffering. In the light of hindsight, these interviews have gained a richer, more tragic meaning. Biographers and cultural observers have since referred to moments in her last media appearances when hints of distress were quietly apparent. Nervous laughter, sudden shifts in tone, brief glimpses of sadness. Behind the bluster, there appeared to be someone acutely conscious of her emotional vulnerability. Her frankness, once an excitement for candid rebelliousness, now tends to be read as coded cries for help. The very characteristics that made her compelling, her intensity, volatility, and eagerness to expose herself, might have also been signs of more profound, implicit anguish. Finally, these interviews are a harsh contrast to the myths that have since enveloped her. They present Joplin not as a larger-than-life figure, but as a woman struggling to balance public adoration with private hollowness. Her charisma covered a complex inner life, one she attempted to define with growing desperation in her final days. These on-camera moments were some of the only times she appeared to drop her guard in a significant manner, providing a candid look at someone struggling with identity, legacy, and the boundaries of what fame could actually deliver. To many fans and scholars, these interviews are not simply artifacts of the past. They are bittersweet reminders of what was lost, neglected, or simply misunderstood in the life of a legend. Biopic challenges. The long-standing effort to bring Janis Joplin's life to the big screen has proven to be one of Hollywood's most complicated and controversial biopic journeys. The current project, with actress Shailene Woodley attached to play the legendary singer, has reignited both excitement and skepticism. Although the film has secured funding through the California Film Commission and entered pre-production with a $10 million budget, its creative future remains uncertain. The core issue lies with the Joplin estate, which maintains tight control over the rights to her music. Without permission to use her original songs and vocal recordings, filmmakers face the daunting task of portraying Joplin's life without access to the very element that made her iconic, her voice. This issue is not new. There have been a number of earlier attempts to produce a Janis Joplin biopic that have fallen apart under legal pressure or creative impasse. One of the most publicized failures was in 2015, when a legal dispute broke out between Silver Reel Partners and LKL Productions over rights to the screenplay Get It While You Can. The suit claimed breach of contract and intellectual property interference, essentially sidelining that project at the very moment when it appeared to be picking up speed. Other versions, with actresses such as Amy Adams, Zooey Deschanel, and Pink, have been reported over the years but never came to fruition because of rights disputes, funding issues, or creative differences with the Joplin estate. The production team today has a singular challenge. Can they convey Janis Joplin's story truthfully without the music that made her history? Securing her music not only gives emotional and historical authenticity, but also decides if viewers will engage with the film on a guttural level. Joplin's voice was not a trademark sound. It was the expression of her soul, hurt, defiance, and vulnerability. If the estate does not provide full rights to her recordings, the filmmakers might be forced to use cover versions or original songs based on her style, which could alienate fans and reduce the credibility of the film as a biographical work. This case has sparked a wider discussion regarding how estates deal with the legacies of legendary artists. Although it is understandable to want to preserve Janis Joplin's memory, critics claim that excessive control can suppress creative homage and restrict the way future generations interact with her life story. A good biopic can reintroduce Joplin to a new generation and solidify her position in cultural heritage, but only if it does justice to the real spirit of her art. The fate of the Shailene Woodley project, as of now, rests in the balance, not only on the filmmaking prowess, but on secret negotiations that will decide if Janis Joplin's actual voice is finally set free on screen. Modern generational disconnect. Modern generational disconnect. In today's hyper-curated digital age, Janis Joplin's raw, unfiltered approach to music and performance presents a stark contrast to the aesthetic and emotional expectations of many younger listeners. Raised in an era where pop stars are polished, auto-tuned, and supported by entire branding teams, Gen Z audiences often find Joplin's raspy vocals, chaotic energy, and emotional vulnerability both jarring and difficult to categorize. Her music lacks the smoothness and rhythmic precision that dominate contemporary charts. Instead, it thrives on unpredictability and unrefined emotion, qualities that were once celebrated but now may be misinterpreted as lacking technical finesse or commercial appeal. Joplin's unapologetic honesty was radical in the 1960s. She wore her hurt on her sleeve, wailed through heartache, and adopted a stage presence that was neither conventionally feminine nor constructed for mass appeal. But through the lens of contemporary culture influenced by visual media, such as Instagram and TikTok, where image tends to take precedence over substance, that same vulnerability can be seen as sloppy or even performative. Today's audiences have been conditioned to read for cues through filters and tightly paced content, so that Joplin's uninhibited delivery will feel strange or discomforting. It's a generation difference, not only in taste, but in the very working of how people engage with public figures. This disconnection has led critics and music historians to debate the best way to keep Joplin's legacy alive, in a manner that speaks to contemporary sensibilities. Some believe that her emotional intensity is timeless and will continue to affect anyone who hears with an open heart. Others believe that if her music is not framed through documentaries, education, or curated introductions, new listeners might entirely miss her relevance. Unless one knows the personal and cultural sorrow she was tapping, one may only hear shrieking where there was previously soulful expression, and turmoil where there was previously catharsis. And yet, hope exists. At a time when conversations about mental health, authenticity, and expressing emotion are increasingly on the table, Joplin's life and music may be relevant again. Her ability to be open in public, to challenge beauty standards, and to belt out a song with raw feeling instead of technical ability may speak to young fans desperate for authenticity in an otherwise artificial landscape. But it will require effort to close the gap through careful reintroductions, biopics well done, and platforms that are willing to celebrate the beauty of imperfection. Until then, Janis Joplin is both timeless and somehow out of sync. A voice from another time, waiting to be heard again properly. Bessie Smith's grave. One of the most poignant and symbolic acts of Janis Joplin's life took place just weeks before her death, when she co-funded a tombstone for blues icon Bessie Smith. Smith, one of the most influential vocalists of the early 20th century, had died in 1937 after a tragic car accident and was buried in a Philadelphia cemetery without a marker. Despite her impact on American music, racial and economic inequities had left her final resting place neglected and forgotten. Joplin, who revered Smith as both a musical and spiritual guide, was deeply disturbed by this injustice. Partnering with Juanita Green, a woman who had known Smith and once worked for her family, Joplin paid for the headstone that would finally give the legendary singer a proper memorial. For Joplin, Bessie Smith was more than a musical influence. She was a lifeline. As a young, alienated white girl in conservative Texas, Joplin found solace in the sorrowful, soulful blues that Smith had recorded decades earlier. She often described feeling like a misfit, and Smith's raw, unfiltered expression of pain, joy, and struggle resonated with her in a way that few other artists could. Joplin did not merely envy Smith's voice. She identified with it. She had once declared she wished to be the first white black woman, a testament to how deeply blues culture influenced her identity. In Smith's rebelliousness against societal norms and in her relentless creativity, Joplin found a blueprint for living and singing without compromise. The headstone, which reads, "The greatest blues singer in the world will never stop singing," was not merely a memorial to a hero. It was a statement of Joplin's own values, of her commitment to celebrating those who were marginalized, forgotten, or pushed to the side. Throughout her own life, Joplin often took the side of outsiders and struggled to be a voice for those who felt invisible. Paying for Bessie Smith's monument wasn't charity or a publicity stunt. It was a declaration of solidarity with another woman who had suffered pain, prejudice, and public misunderstanding on behalf of her art. It was, in a sense, Joplin's thank you to Smith for opening the musical path, as well as the spiritual one. Today, this act of remembrance becomes perhaps the most eloquent and admirable act of Joplin's short but significant life. It is a demonstration of the strength of her beliefs and her determination not to allow important stories to go underground, either literally or otherwise. As much as Joplin represented the 1960s counterculture's excesses, scenes like this demonstrate a woman who was loyal to the truth and to legacy. In alluding to Bessie Smith, Janis Joplin was not merely a tribute to the past, but was proclaiming how the music establishment and the world in general should treat its trailblazers. It is one of her most lasting acts of kindness, and one that serves to further deepen the emotional power of her own legacy. But while Janis honored the forgotten voices of the past, her own story would soon echo through a darker pattern that still haunts the music world today. The 27 Club legacy. Janis Joplin's death at the age of 27 placed her among an unsettling and iconic group of musicians and artists who also died at the same age, a group that has since become known as the 27 Club. Alongside Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain, and Amy Winehouse, Joplin's inclusion in this unofficial club has fueled decades of speculation, mythologizing, and analysis. The idea that so many groundbreaking talents perished at the same age has fascinated both fans and cultural critics alike, giving rise to theories ranging from numerological coincidence to psychological tipping points. For Joplin, whose rise to fame was as swift as it was overwhelming, the number 27 came to symbolize a tragic threshold, one she could not survive crossing. What makes the 27 Club so haunting is how its members, while individually distinct in style and history, tend to have strikingly similar life paths. Scholars and mental health professionals have pointed to commonalities among them: childhood trauma or instability at an early age, meteoric rise to fame as a youth, drug use, and the absence of positive support systems. Joplin's own life follows this pattern almost too neatly. She was bullied and ostracized as a teenager, self-medicated with drugs and alcohol to deal with self-esteem problems, and catapulted into the limelight without emotional resources to navigate it. As with the others, her public image was fetid for its edginess and abandon. Her private agony rendered invisible or incomprehensible until it was too late. These trends have raised serious discussions regarding the role of the music industry and the wider entertainment complex when it comes to safeguarding young artists. Critics say that the same system that benefits from their raw talent and outlaw spirit too often neglects to offer proper mental health care or mentorship. In Joplin's instance, her producers and managers were aware of her addiction problems, but the demands to perform, record, and look appealing appeared to outweigh her health. This tension between care and exploitation still resounds in contemporary cases, rendering the 27 Club a cultural phenomenon, but also a cautionary tale that still holds relevance today. The 27 Club phenomenon continues to be firmly rooted in popular culture, not only as a sad coincidence, but as an emblem of how fame threatens to engulf the most emotionally susceptible. Joplin is especially important to this tale because she was one of the first members, and her death cemented the mythic status of the era. But behind the legend lies a very true story of a young woman who was weighed down by the burden of expectation, artistic pressure, and emotional loneliness. Her place among the 27 Club raises vital questions about how society idolizes genius, but sometimes blinds itself to the pain that drives it. In celebrating the artistry of Janis Joplin, it is also necessary to explore the cultural and systemic factors that brought about her downfall and that continue to imperil artists who tread her path. If you found this dive into Janis Joplin's final days as haunting as we did, hit that like button and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from music history. And if you're ready for another deep cut, click on the next video on your screen. It's one you won't want to miss.